We will start, as we often do, with Sunday Night Football. We're not going to give short shrift to the Detroit Lions. You know, Myles, I thought of this morning. The one thing about college football that I like, and there isn't much about college football that I like anymore because I feel like the players should get a paycheck for every game that they play, just like professional players do because of the amount of money that they generate for the sport. And I'm not going to get up on my soapbox. My point is, I've become disillusioned with college football the more and more I see all the money, all the revenue, and the players, at least they get something now, but not what they should. My point is this. At the end of a college football season, there are multiple teams that are happy because they went to a bowl game and they won it. And it doesn't matter if they didn't win the championship, and it doesn't matter if they don't finish in the top 10. They had a good enough season, they went to a bowl game, and they won it. And I thought of that because in the NFL, that's not the case. There's only one team that's happy about winning its final game of the season, the Super Bowl champion. That said, the Detroit Lions won a bowl game last night. And, you know, all the talk and there was all the hand-wringing and the gnashing of teeth by the Seahawks. Oh, the game's not being played at the same time. The Lions aren't going to have the same motivation. And I was on radio on KJR last week, and I tried to tell them, look, there's two very important things about this. Number one, they'll at least know when the game starts where they stand. Because if you play the game at the same time, they're going to be watching the scoreboard. Now, that game yesterday was closer than I thought it was going to be. But if the Seahawks were destroying the Rams and the Lions figured out at halftime, you go into the game thinking you have a chance. At halftime, you don't. That's too complicated for a football player or anybody like me that thinks in very linear fashion. I want to know what my marching orders are. The Lions knew their marching orders, and their marching orders was go out and stomp the Packers and keep them out of the playoffs. Okay, we no longer can get in. Fine. We know what we're here to do. We're in the last game of the regular season. That's a big spot for any team, especially the Detroit Lions, downtrodden by their own mismanagement and ineptitude for 60 years, but regardless, downtrodden, rising up, they qualify for the final game of the season, and they go out there and they knock Aaron Rodgers and the despised Green Bay Packers, from the perspective of Lions fans, out of the playoffs, when the Lions historically have not been able to win at Lambeau Field. It was amazing to see what the Lions did last night in that spot, knowing that there's no reward beyond last night other than satisfaction for a job well done.
Well, that was the thing that I was thinking about the entire week with Dan Campbell, is that it's a pretty big coaching job, right? How do you necessarily motivate your team when there's no playoffs potentially on the line? And basically the marching orders were, well, if we're not going to the dance, neither are you. And for whatever reason, that totally galvanized the Detroit Lions. And they felt like they had a spotlight game. They were able to go in there and show what it was that they could do, who it is that they are. You know, Dan Campbell saying after the game that these aren't your same old Detroit Lions. Man, I feel like that's true because they were aggressive. You know, they had nothing to lose and they played like it. And it was just one of those games where, you know what? It may effectively be a sort of changing of the guard in the NFC North, even though, yeah, I know the Vikings happen to win that division and they're going to be playing the Giants next week. But if you look at where the Detroit Lions are, what they have in terms of draft capital because of what the Los Angeles Rams did this year, this is obviously a team that is ascending, and they've got some really good vibes heading into the offseason.
Yeah, they finished the year 9-8 after starting 1-6, barely missing the playoffs, vaulting the Seahawks into the 7th seed, knocking out the Packers in the process. The Lions finished winning 8 of their final 10 games. And hey, look, the losses early in a year, they're not indicative of who a team is going to be, but those losses can keep you from achieving your ultimate goals. And in the Lions' case, it was one loss too many and no playoffs for them, but they have nothing to be ashamed of, and they do have a team that feels like it is ascending. And Jared Goff, who, when they traded for him 2 years ago this month, it felt like a short-term, we'll tolerate this guy's salary. We're doing it for the extra first-round draft pick. We got 2 1s and a 3 for the Stafford-Goff flip-flop, and now Goff, based on 2 seasons, and particularly this season, looking like the guy who can be the long-term answer for the Detroit Lions. That's the best part of this. The guy that was I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a polite way to put it, but the Lions were taking in a guy that the Rams were just done with. This was a Brock Osweiler trade. It really was. And it was jammed into the Matthew Stafford deal, so it wouldn't be quite as obvious and humiliating for the Rams that just 2 seasons after giving Jared Goff this gigantic contract, they decided we must get rid of him, even if it means giving a team a first-round pick to take this god-awful contract off our books. So this would be the same as Brock Osweiler going to Cleveland and not just hanging around for training camp, becoming the starter, and they realize at some point along the way, well, one man's trash is another man's treasure. That's what the Lions have figured out.
Well, right. And I recall that there was also, somebody who covers the NFL and has done so for a really long time, who wanted the Lions to trade for Baker Mayfield. And I don't really think that would have been a very good idea. But, now we see that Jared Goff has really emerged here as a viable starting quarterback option. And he's playing some of the best football of his career, right? I mean, I was witness to 2017 and 2018, and his rise then helped propel my rise in some ways as a media person. But now I think what you see with Detroit is that they've got options, right? I mean, they can go and they can really improve their team. I mean, they have one of the top picks in the draft. They don't have to use that. They could back up, right? They could do whatever they want. And so now you're going to be able to see, I think, that defense take steps forward. The only thing that is sort of, I guess, a little bit of a concern to me, if I'm a Lions fan, is what if Ben Johnson gets a head coaching job?
Well, you know what? You're absolutely right. And this is why, why any owners out there who happen to be paying attention, if you are, man, being rich really doesn't have as many privileges as I thought. But if you are for some reason watching this program, this is something I say, and this is no disrespect to all of the qualified defensive coaches out there. But if your head coach isn't also your offensive coordinator / quarterback whisperer, and your team does really well, you better have a good plan for replacing the guy who got the quarterback to where he is. Because if Ben Johnson goes, Dan Campbell's got a problem. And you can say it's a good problem to have because Dan Campbell sporting his own coaching tree, that's fine. But the most important relationship is coach and quarterback. And if Ben Johnson is the guy who has worked this magic with Jared Goff and maybe would have worked the same magic with Baker Mayfield, we don't know. And look, the whole Baker Mayfield to the Lions take was premised on the fact that Jared Goff last year wasn't very good. Now that we know that Jared Goff is capable of growing into the job, I'm fine with it. But Myles,
Jared Goff was decent when Ben Johnson was the offensive play caller. I'm just gonna put that out there.
I know, but not so good that we were saying after 1 year what we're saying after 2. After 2 years, we're saying Jared Goff can be the long-term answer for the Lions. After 1 year, we were still saying what are they going to do after 2022? Now we know that they've got those high picks. Well, the high pick thanks to the Rams. They're not going to burn it on a quarterback. They're going to move forward with Jared Goff, but the question is they may be moving forward without Ben Johnson, and that is an excellent point. And even though it worked out for the Jaguars and they got to the playoffs, not taking Aiden Hutchinson with the first overall pick in the draft, I remember when it happened, I thought, boy, this just falls perfectly for the Detroit Lions. They get the Michigan native. They get the guy that many thought was the number 1 prospect in the draft, and he's been awesome this year for the Detroit Lions. And again, they didn't make it to the playoffs, so it wasn't as awesome as it needed to be, but he's come on strong, and he just looks like a guy who can be a foundational piece. They've got multiple foundational pieces, guys that you just look to and say, they're going to be around for a while, and they're going to be part of this ongoing growth, ongoing threat to compete. And the NFC North, especially if Aaron Rodgers goes, the NFC North is wide open. It's there for the taking. The Vikings can't do the pull a rabbit out of your butt thing indefinitely. Who knows what the Bears are going to be? The Lions are in a position where they can do something they have never done. I remember there have been flashes. 1980, they started 4-0, and their theme song was Another One Bites the Dust. And then in the 90s, after Barry Sanders arrived, they made it to the playoffs, but they only won one playoff game. Early 90s, 1991, against the Cowboys, I believe it was. Was it the Cowboys? It may have been the Cowboys that year, before the Cowboys had their rise to 3 Super Bowl wins in 4 years. But there's never been a sense of the Lions being in charge of that division in the 50 years that I've been following the NFL. And it feels like it may be the dawn of the Lions finally turning it around, Myles.
It does. And look, I mean, it's funny because that sort of turnaround that happened this year happened after Sheila Ford Hamp, their owner, kind of came out and gave that vote of confidence to Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. And at that point, they were 1-6, and they go down the rest of the season and they finish 8-2. And it really tells you kind of what they're building. They are building something. I mean, you talk about those foundational pieces, right? You're talking about guys like Hutchinson, like Amon-Ra St. Brown, like Jameson Williams. There are a lot of good pieces there that they have and that they can build on. And so I feel like, when you have something like this where you see a team continuing to rise at the end of the season, it's one of those teams where, and Mike, you've said this, nobody really wanted probably to go play them in the postseason. Man, I think looking at the Lions and seeing them against San Francisco next weekend probably would have been a fun game, whether or not Detroit comes out and wins it. But at this point, you can still say that Detroit looks like they're building something, and they actually seem like they are building something sustainable. And we haven't really seen that in a while.
I agree with you. We've never seen it from the Lions from the standpoint where it felt like they're taking next step. They just kind of dog paddled as a playoff team with Barry Sanders. And I think that's one of the reasons why Barry Sanders ultimately walked away. All the stories that came out at the time when he suddenly retired during the 1999, just before training camp, just gone. Like, I've been here 10 years. Is it ever going to get any better than this? It's not. What's the point? Why keep doing this? We're never going to be a great team. We're never going to be a competitive team. We're never going to be anything more than an also-ran or just right on the fringes, right? We can kind of get to the edge of the porch, but we can't get anywhere close to the door and begin to kick it in. And now they're at a point where they're going to be a team that is going to be the trendy pick next year to make noise, to get to the playoffs and win some postseason games, take over the NFC North. And a lot can change between now and then. And you made a great point. When Sheila Ford Hamp gave her vote of confidence to Dan Campbell, my thought was that we've heard this before. It's just a precursor to another regime change. And the thing the Lions do, they never give a new overall coaching staff and front office enough time to work. And who knows what would have happened with Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia if it ever would have worked. It was too dramatic of a change from what they had before. So now in comes Dan Campbell, and it's dramatic change from what they had before. You have to give it time. And the key to all this is Chris Spielman. He stays in the background, but Chris Spielman is the guy that championed Dan Campbell. It's the Chris Spielman mindset that led to the whole kneecap-biting mantra that we hear coming from Dan Campbell's introductory press conference. So it's good that the Lions stayed the course, and there's no guarantee they would have at the end of the season if they would have kept losing. But they didn't panic halfway through the season and start firing people, which is good. They wrote it out, and now they've laid the foundation for something very promising for 2023, but we'll see how it plays out. But good news for the Lions and a great way to finish the year. And they can claim, other than the Super Bowl champion, to be the one team that won their final game of the year and is very happy about it and can carry that positivity into the following season, and we'll see what they do.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.